Hello everyone, today I'm going to run an experiment that I'm almost certain no one has ever done before. I'm going to try playing Fallout New Vegas as a Nihilist. This is the first video in a series I plan to do where I plan on playing through video games with a specific worldview in mind. Check the link video to hear more. However, for this run, there will be a series of rules, but we'll introduce those as we go. Just a quick warning, this will be weird. By the end, I will have some thoughts that will bring this all together. First things first, we need to name our character, and I settled on the philosopher J.L. Mackie. Mackie was one of the great academic voices in favor of philosophical nihilism in the 20th century. Just to be clear, this character is totally distinct from the real man. J.L. Mackie, I'm sure, was a great person, but our character may be making decisions that are quite questionable at best. For this run, stats won't really matter, as this can work with pretty much any build, so I'll just use these. As we answer some questions for Doc Mitchell, I want to go over our first rule. Rule number 1 is that we must make all decisions with a nihilist meta-ethical framework in mind. Now, not everyone may know what nihilism is, so I'll give a basic rundown here, and I'll jump into a few proofs for nihilism as we go. Nihilism is a philosophical position that states all moral statements are false. A simple way of understanding this would be to say that there are no right and wrongs. Therefore, any framework that claims moral qualities seems to be in direct opposition to nihilism. As we finished creating our character, we're going to take advantage of the good doctor's hospitality to get some supplies, and dress the part of an Oxford professor while we're at it. You may be wondering why I haven't mentioned Nietzsche yet in a video on nihilism, but that's because he was actually deathly afraid of the inevitable wave of nihilism that would wash over Europe in the 20th century. Nietzsche tried desperately to develop a system of ethics that would not result in the complete degradation of society. But that's a story for another video. Let's move on from there. After realizing I forgot to give ourselves enough lockpicking or hacking to get into this safe in the schoolhouse, I decided that it just wouldn't matter, and I'd head into town to get some supplies for our journey. Here we come across our first decision and question of morality. Our character really wants this gun, the one that's kind of sitting in the case over here, and doesn't really want to pay for it. He could steal it, but what does nihilism have to say about that? One of the foundational pillars for Mackie's articulation of nihilism is error theory. Error theory states that humanity is an error if we believe that there are such things as moral imperatives. He has several arguments for this, but we'll go over them as we go. But the first thing is this: the argument from relativity. Some cultures say that one action is wrong, and another may say that it's perfectly acceptable. Mackie argues that the best explanation for this is that there are no objective moral values. So, if we consider Chet here, he probably thinks that stealing and killing him is wrong. But I'm sure that someone in Caesar's Legion would disagree. That seems like good evidence that we can't come to a conclusion on this issue. Now, you may be tempted to say that it is morally permissible to steal or kill according to nihilism. But you can't say that. Nihilism says that all moral claims are false, including ones that state an action is morally permissible. This is a problem we will continue to run into. I think it's clear now that we've made a decision on what to do, and we'll continue to move on. After doing a few little jobs for Sunny Smiles, including killing some geckos. For example, from what we were talking about before, we run into this woman being attacked by geckos. We make a decision not to kill her, even though it took a lot of willpower not to. Consider this: if I just did everything I wanted to do, then I would just be feeding into some sort of evolutionary tinkering in my brain. My goal is to avoid all types of odds, including those that are assumed in biological determinism. We are not beholden to anything. Therefore, we're going to spare this poor limping woman. We should also consider how nihilism would influence the quests that we would take on. Here, to frustrate a few of you, I refuse to fully complete Sunny Smiles' quest, where I would eventually learn how to make some natural medicine. I'm taking some liberties to make this whole gameplay session comprehensible, and I've decided that the scope of this kind of gameplay will be the Good Springs conflict. This makes sure that we at least have a target to approach, and we don't completely spiral into the wilderness. Also, I thought it would be just as fitting to kill Cheyenne at this point. We decided to kind of go on our own for a little bit, and as we wander the desert, let's talk about another argument for error theory. Premise 1. The existence of God is a necessary condition for the existence of objective moral values. Premise 2. God does not exist. Therefore, objective morals and values do not exist. The goal of this argument is to again support the idea that humanity is an error in thinking there are no objective moral values. As an avid atheist, Mackie has no trouble in supporting both of these premises, and therefore is reinforced in his belief that there are no objective moral values. As we continue to wander around, we find ourselves pick fights. And as we fight for a bit, I want to compare nihilism to emotivism. Emotivism you might have heard in your philosophy classes, but it is unlike nihilism. It states that all moral statements are simply statements of opinion with no truth value. For example, if I say that curing children of cancer is good, the emotivist would say that I am simply just saying, "Yay, helping children." This has a nuanced difference from nihilism, which would just state that my belief in the inherent goodness of ending childhood cancer is false, as there is nothing that is moral. Emotivism takes the next step and challenges the existence of moral thinking itself. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're going to stick well into treating moral dilemmas as real things. To make a better determination on how we should resolve the Ghost Town gunfight, we're going to investigate the powder gangers and learn more about them. We also will run into some explosives as we go, it seems. One argument in favor of error theory that Mackie was best known for was the argument from Queerness. Though this word has semantically shifted wildly over the decades, so it would be best to understand the word queer to be synonymous with the word strange in this context. Mackie points out how odd moral values seem. For example, we can easily verify many things about the universe with concrete evidence. However, moral values cannot be proven like many things through a naturalistic framework. Moral values are also prescriptive, so they give us reason to act a specific way. There are no other things like this in the universe, and if these values did exist, they seem very unlikely. Therefore, Mackie concludes that they must not exist. Well, next up, we run a few jobs for the powder gangers to see what kind of philosophy they bring to the wasteland. And while we go through this, I want to answer the question that I'm sure someone is asking. Well, why don't we roll a die to determine the outcome of any moral choice that we're going to be making? There are a few responses I have to this. First is, how would I be able to fit all the possible choices on a die or a number generator? In an interaction with a character, I could hit them, shoot them, blow them up, be rude to them, be kind then rude to them, harm them but leave them alive. It is impossibly complex, and there's no method of simplification that would be satisfactory to me. Secondly, choosing a value randomly wouldn't be nihilism anymore. It would be more of a new philosophy based off of chance. Same goes for choices that benefit my character the most. That would be just egoism disguised as nihilism. When I do these things, I'm letting a new set of principles take over the purity of the nihilism is gone. I'll talk about this more in the future, but this all seems like a clear example of using nihilism as a shield for another worldview. And as I said before, I would just be an egoist, for example, using nihilism as a guise to do what I want without criticism. You could easily extend that to the case about rolling a die. That is a chance-based morality, you could say. Here we come to an interesting problem. I try to make a direct route to Prim after this past job I did, but I'm blocked. I decide it's time for nihilism to reach every part of the game. I decide that trying to go around would take too long for my liking, and I proceed to toggle clipping. This allows for our characters to walk through solid objects. With this newfound rejection of all the rules themselves, as they're just constructs of people like Josh Sawyer, we get information we need for the powder gangers and return to them. But we did this just to get a better idea of who they are for Ghost Town Gunfight. So as we get back to them and tell them, we don't have any interest in completing this series of tasks for them, we'll just move on. In Goodsprings, we can deliberate on the facts of the matter. The Powdergangers are rebels and known convicts of the NCR. They have been mistreated, and they are trying to hold out against the seeming tyranny of the NCR. Goodsprings, on the other hand, is a small town and community of farmers with plenty of innocent people. Joe Cobb seems to want to just hunt down the fugitive he's been following, but we also know that we can convince him that taking over the town is something that he would be interested in. Joe Cobb seems selfish and is willing to sacrifice innocent human life in order to improve his own life. Whereas our fugitive friend here, he just wants to live life without the attack of the Powdergangers on him. He just wants to work for his company and continue on his days playing Caravan, because everybody loves playing Caravan in this game. After a bit of processing and recreation to clear our characters' minds, we begin to ask the question, what does nihilism teach us about the answer to this moral conundrum? Who do we side with? What do we do? Nihilism, with a loud and powerful voice, states that it really doesn't matter. None of this mattered. I did all this investigating for naught. The answer is the same no matter the facts. None of it shakes the nihilist because in the end, it doesn't matter. So I decide to just do whatever because it doesn't matter anyway. And here we can begin to review my thoughts on this whole experiment. Though Jail Mackey may be an incredible intellect, he faces the same problem that all of science and philosophy faces. Why? What is this all for? In this case, we ask, why are you doing philosophy? I don't think these questions are considered enough. One may answer this question by saying, we do philosophy to find truth. However, what is truth to a nihilist? Why do they care? One of the fundamental pillars of academia is honest conversation where nothing is falsified. If a scientist makes up data, it's a scandal. Now, I'm not accusing Mackey of being a bad academic, but I am also saying that he has no moral reason to act honestly in an academic setting. And he has no reason to particularly prefer continuing his career and not being fired from Oxford. Biology, anthropology, power dynamics, these are all a weak attempt to backdoor moral philosophy to the nihilist. The nihilist has just as much reason to reject these reasons as any others. As we have seen, there's no justification needed. Acting in accord with what someone wants is no longer nihilism, but egoism in disguise. I reached the end of this project quite frustrated, probably just as you are. It doesn't matter. According to nihilism, it doesn't matter. Whether I kill Sunny Smiles or not, whether I kill Cheyenne or not, whether I help the Powdergangers or I don't, it doesn't matter. Whether I die in the process, it doesn't matter. The fundamental aspect of nihilism is that all moral claims are false. The good fortune I run into here is that if anyone accuses me of being dishonest, I can be sure that said critic is not a nihilist. Because if they were, why would they expect any differently? And why should they care? I understand some of the feelings of hurt that can lead someone towards nihilism. Those are real. But nihilism is a road to death that is worse than all the alternatives because it quite literally embraces nothing full-heartedly. I don't plan on doing a reflection like this in most of my videos, but this felt like a moral imperative to strongly warn everyone from the path of nihilism. Even if you find yourself convinced by the arguments of nihilism, I would recommend against living like a true nihilist, because it just doesn't work. It's unlivable. While I truly respect people who follow their beliefs to the very end, and are unwaveringly loyal and steadfast, the nihilist does not allow me even to applaud them for that. It is truly empty. Now, I want to address the people who claim to live as nihilists. I honestly don't think you are really nihilist. Truly. Nihilism wants nothing to do with the thou shalt nots. But as G.K. Chesterton writes, thou shalt not is one of the necessary corollaries of I will. I will go to the Lord Mayor's show, and thou shalt not stop me. We can even look to the Marquis de Sade as a person who claims the mantle of nihilism. But even he will point to an ideal of freedom to justify his sick moral life. In his example, he hides his twisted, sadistic, egoistic hedonism under the polite guise of nihilism. Probably because it sounds better at parties. We talk a lot about belief, but I think the most basic form of belief is action. What do you act on? If you act like people have value, does that say that you have that belief more than anything you could say intellectually? I think anyone could say that they're a nihilist, but in the end, to prove it is incredibly difficult. You would have to act randomly, like utterly randomly, but not too randomly, but without any sense. It's not bad to find something to be important. And there is room for subjectivism, but this isn't subjectivism. This is nihilism. This is a different issue entirely. I want to make one last note. It may be true that a nihilist may act in any sets of ways and say that there are no rules. However, in this sense, a nihilist could just as well be anyone. A nihilist could very well look at like Mackie. He's happily married, theoretically, from the outside. He probably donated money to the poor, like, an average guy. But I don't entertain this claim, because to me it makes no sense. That is having a Protestant moral ethic for no reason. It's nonsense. At least in my view, the whole practice of philosophy is to guide us closer to what is right and to why, and to bring our participation close with our beliefs. When we can become a fully united person, that's when philosophy has gone right. I don't have a lot of respect for people who act a certain way and claim they have no reason for doing so. This kind of separation is one of the biggest loads of bullshit that I've ever heard. Thank you all for listening, and I swear it won't be this serious and this reflective next time, but thank you all for listening, and I hope you all have an amazing day. And please, if you consider nihilism, just consider anything else. This is a really dark place, and I hope you never have to be in it. Thank you.
Wrapped in white linen and cold as the clay. Oh, beat the drum slowly and play the fife lowly. Play the dead march as you bear me alone. Take me to the valley and lay the sod o'er